This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Cameron Journal Podcast. I am joined by Jeffrey Shaw. He does all things self-employed. He's part of the Self-Employed Business Institute. He is a multi-best-selling author. He's been everywhere, has tons of podcast appearances and lots of social media followers. He's been a TEDx speaker, and he does the Self-Employed Summit and all this sort of thing. And he is the how to optimize working for yourself is kind of his whole raison d'etre. So we're going to learn a lot today, and I'm going to be very interested because, as my longtime readers know, I have been self-employed forever and ever. I am terminally unemployed. No one will ever hire me for anything. So we're going to learn how not to be homeless and starving in a box. So welcome, Jeffrey, to the Cameron Journal Podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Well, you're one of the we're a kinship because we're one of the few people that have never had a traditional job. I've never received a paycheck. I've been self-employed my entire life as well. And I didn't think that was odd until everybody else told me how odd it was. Apparently you and I are a pretty small number of people.
Yeah, I will say that I've only ever had 3 W-2 jobs in my entire life, and the longest one lasted 11 months. Okay. I started out freelancing, doing copywriting and all that type of thing, and then worked retail. I did catering kind of under the table for a while, all this sort of this. I've just always just kind of done whatever it is that I do sort of thing, and people will give me money for that from time to time. And so it's quite a journey. And you're absolutely right. Most people don't ever do that. People don't know how to, function without having a job and a place to go and someone to report to and all this type of thing. So Well, why don't you start us from the beginning? If you've never had a job, how did you get started and how did you get into this whole self-employment thing? Let's start from the beginning.
So it's funny. What you had said resonated for me as far as being permanently unemployable. I literally have T-shirts that say unemployable on them, which I had made. And it was actually realizing or feeling that I felt unemployable, which is why I became self-employed. And it started when I was young. As a teenager, I was a really shy kid, really suffered from shyness as a kid, didn't have a lot of self-esteem. I lived in a community that didn't talk about higher education. I had 2 older brothers, and neither of them went on to college. They graduated from high school, and one of my brothers dropped out of high school. So they just, went right into construction or wherever they could get work. And my father one day said to me, "No one is ever going to care about your life as much as you do." And I thought to myself, if that's true, then I've got to take care of myself. So I'll just become self-employed. I figured there's no way in hell anybody's going to ever employ me. I had no social skills. I was very awkward. No skill set. I'm like, who's going to hire me? So I better create my own thing. So at 14 years old, I started selling eggs door to door. I lived in the country, didn't have our own chickens. I struck a deal with a local farmer that I would buy a dozen eggs for 25 cents and I would sell them for $1.25. So I made $1 dozen an egg. And I did really well with that. I went door to door selling eggs. My mom owned a beauty parlor for old ladies. So I would pack up the eggs on Saturdays and she would sell all the eggs on Saturdays because they need them for Sunday brunch or breakfast. And so that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And I learned a ton. And probably the thing that I love that I learned the most at 14 years old was that no matter how scared you are, no matter how out of your comfort zone you are, if the benefits are greater than the fear, you'll keep going. And for me, the benefit is not just financial. I was growing. And that to me was the biggest benefit. I felt like by knocking on doors, I was growing out of my shyness. I was growing as a person. I was growing more adventurous. I looked at all the neighborhood kids that seemed more confident, better looking, more confident, more self-assured, but all they were doing was playing around the neighborhood, and I was doing something with my life. So
Yeah.
that's to me was the benefits, so that I kept on going. And I have found that to be true my entire 40-year career being self-employed. I feel like it's like personal development on steroids. And that's a craving I love. I love to keep growing, and self-employment is just a great avenue to get out of your comfort zone, keep growing, help other people. By 20 years old, I was a professional photographer. Very unusual business. I was a portrait photographer for very affluent families. So now I'm traveling in the spheres of very affluent people in their mansions and their homes in Italy and Europe, and traveling. And I grew up lower middle class, so this was very new to me. But again, stepped into a comfort zone, a different zone than my comfort zone, and rose to the occasion. Did that for 25 years straight out. I still do very little. I'll still do a few sessions a year, 40 years later. But for the past 15 years, I started venturing into coaching and writing books and helping other people build their unusual businesses. So it was no longer just about me. It was about how can I use what I've learned and serve other people. And that's why I founded the Self-Employed Business Institute as well, as an educational platform for self-employed business owners. So here we are today. Still probably playing out of my comfort zone now and then, but that's why we do this thing.
No, that's I think that's spectacular, if a bit genuinely frightening. So if somebody is, obviously since the pandemic, a lot has changed. The world has changed. People's attitudes towards work and whatnot have changed. If someone's looking at making the leap from the W-2 world to the 1099 world, what's your advice to them?
Yeah. Well, first of all, give yourself some time. And this is actually what I specialize in on one-to-one coaching. All right. So my business today, yes, I've written books and I do other things, but my primary business model is that I have the Self-Employed Business Institute and one-to-one coaching. And in my one-to-one coaching, I specialize in helping people transition from corporate to self-employment. So one thing is to give yourself time. I can even make it available to your listeners. I have a document called selfemployedready.com. So if they go to selfemployedready.com, it's a 12-month timeline of how to leave your job, what boxes to tick, what plans to make. Preferably over 12 months. A lot of people don't leave themselves 12 months. A lot of people wait 3 years too long. And at that point, they're just so fed up, they're ready to run out the door. But even if you have 6 months, 3 months, this timeline will help you check all the boxes to make sure that you're not overlooking anything that you want to take care of before you leave your job. Because I want to encourage people to take a safe leap. Everybody I work with has lives in motion. They've got great experience in the corporate world. They're making a good salary. They may have a family. They may have a home and responsibilities. I don't want people to just tear the Band-Aid off and put their lives at risk. So let's make it a safe risk. Follow that timeline. And then the second thing I'll offer, which is ultimately important, is to get clear on the message you're bringing out into the world, right? To get clear on your reason for becoming self-employed, and very importantly, in a practical sense, a clear brand message to those that you're going to serve, so that you have a marketable thing to put out in the world. It's more than you have a passion project, but if your passion project's not marketable, you don't want to be putting your finances at risk because you have a great idea that really excites you but isn't marketable. But on the other hand, you don't want to leave the corporate job to recreate a job for yourself that ends up making you feel as trapped as the corporate job. So what I help people do, in addition to the structure of their business, is to help them find the intersection between what's meaningful to them and marketable in the world. And a lot of that comes from just getting really clear on what you do, what you have to offer that's unique, who you have to offer it to, and how are you going to communicate that to the world through a really clear and concise brand message. From that, you can build almost any business successfully. But what most people lack is the clarity. And then they flounder for 3 to 5 years trying to figure it all out. But in that 3 to 5 years, they've drained themselves of energy. They probably drained their finances. And now they're in a more critical position. So you serve yourself incredibly well if you gain that clarity before you leave your job.
Yeah, where were you in like 2005 when I was started doing all of this? I learned all that the hard way.
I hear
Um,
that a lot. I mean, honestly, when people read my book is called The Self-Employed Life, my podcast is The Self-Employed Life, the Self-Employed Business Institute. That is the number one thing people say is like, where were you 10 years ago? Where were you 20 years ago? I get that a lot. And that's my point. It's like, I'm here now. And I
yeah.
really want to encourage people to not try to reinvent the wheel. Like I've already done this stuff. That's why the Self-Employed Business Institute exists. That's why I founded it. It's like I've already done all this stuff, the marketing
No,
strategies,
I've
right?
just started to um I've just started to build things this year. I'm working on my writing, coaching, and public speaking for the first time. We're making a serious run at that. Um, I just completed my MFA and all this type of thing, and I have 3 books out now and more coming. And so I'm finally getting to the place where that, and I'm also getting old enough to where I don't look like a 12-year-old to mature people trying to be like, hey, all this sort of thing. I'm 35 this year, so I'm starting to get a little bit of gravitas ever so slightly enough.
Yeah.
And which I didn't even realize for the longest time was like part of my issue. But we're making a serious run at that this year. And it's I this is the first time where I feel like I'm finally in a place where I can start making like real money, because
Mhm.
hitherto I've kind of been on the whole, build it and they will come sort of thing, and I've kind of created all this wonderful great stuff and people enjoy reading it, and then that became books and all this type of thing. But this is the first time where I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, I could actually start like making real money a month and not be, impossibly broke all the time, and doing side projects and all this type of thing and whatnot. And it is yeah, having something like that, even if I had known that 5 years ago in 2019 when I restarted the business,
Yeah.
it would have been a huge game
Yeah.
changer.
I mean, what we like to
You really
tell.
do have to kind of know about like your product, what it is you're offering, what it is you're going to sell, all that sort of thing.
Yep.
And I have never had any of that. I've
Yep.
never had
No,
any of
it's
that in my whole career until now. It's
and we
weird.
yeah, and we often refer to as we help people collapse time, and the fact matters we tend to work with people that are somewhere like our target students are somewhere between 35 and 55. We have many that are older, some that are younger, but the fact matter is we are intentionally at an education for self-employed business owners for people that are of some age and some experience. We're not striving for the 20-year-olds, and we're not even really striving to work with startups, because there's an advantage to being out there for at least a little while, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, or 10 years. It's having been out there for a while gives you a lot of information that when you come to us with your confusion, your chaos, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and not knowing what to do next, that's where I'm particularly good, and our curriculum is particularly good at unpacking that and offering you an opportunity for exponential growth. But it's really hard to create exponential growth when there's nothing to start with. So it's actually favorable to actually have had the work experiences that you've had. So this is something I will often tell, self-employed business owners that, especially if they're just starting out, as I said earlier, try to gain the clarity that you need. Then get out there for a little bit. Be out there for a year or two, even. Figure out what works, what doesn't work. Don't expect it to be, butterflies and unicorns at that period, but then it's really a good idea to work with a professional coach or receive the education that you need to unpack what you've learned and get it going as quickly as possible. I look at it as, as we're out prospecting for potential students, I almost look at it as an intervention. Like we're really looking to get in there into the lives of people who have been in business for 2 to 5 years. And we look at it as a bit as an intervention, because if their business isn't producing for them what they want it to produce, particularly if they've left a good salaried position, if their new company is not providing the rewards that they want, within 3 to 5 years, most people are going to burn out. They're either going to get tired of trying so hard and not getting the results, or they're going to drain their finances, or they're going to start losing the support of loved ones around them who supported their dream for the first couple of years. But hey, honey, you're now 4 or 5 years in and you're not, cutting any real money. I'm starting to lose my patience, right? So I find I almost look at that as it's an intervention period that we're trying to get to people so that they can get the educational support they need. But the same is true. We also work with a lot of people that have been in business for 10, 20 years. And their challenge is reinvention. Anybody that's been in business more than 10 years, the world is very different today. The world of marketing and running a business is very different today than it was 10 years ago. And they're feeling the pinch to figure out how they might have another 10, 15 years left in them to be working. So they're not dead yet, but so they need to recreate what's not working for them. And what worked for them 10 years ago is easy. Now it's not so easy. So we work with a lot of clients in that space too, again, so they don't burn out. We can get them back on track as quickly as possible.
Yes. Yes. Speaking as the captain of the SS Burnout, I've told someone, I said I've been burnt out since 2007. And I've just kind of been riding the burnout wave ever since then. That does make a lot of sense, and things have changed a great deal. I mean, I've gone through so many iterations. Like when I first started out copywriting and freelancing, I just kind of used these like online job boards, and that kind of paid enough and everything, and it was all super cool. And then the recession came, and that all disappeared, and it got eaten up by the recession and foreign competition. When they opened it up to people in India who could do it faster and cheaper, or people in Malaysia who could do it faster and cheaper, it became very impractical for a lot of us who were doing that sort of work in this country. And then there were kind of always these people that I never understood at the time who had, these magical clients that seemed to come out of thin air and never could figure out where these people met these people, sort of thing. And they seemed to be fine. And I very foolishly dumped a ton of money into that business in the middle of a recession, in the middle of the way it was changing, and ended up broke, sick, and very tired. I had walking pneumonia in 2011. That was fun. And then I had to that was the end of that by that time. And I had to completely start over. That was just, business iteration number one. Little did I know there'd be many more iterations to come.
Those are, yeah.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. So I think especially that long-term thing, is definitely, things do change, economies shift, things shift. And then all of a sudden, your business model that has worked so well, one day you wake up and it doesn't anymore.
Yep.
And that's a very difficult thing.
And I think it's happening at a more rapid rate today. It's the world changes at a more rapid rate. But I don't see that as a doom and gloom message, because I think so often it's adaptable, right? I mean, what's happened with AI in the past 6 months, a year, if you want to even consider that long, but really it's been more than 6 months. I'm sure a lot of people, same thing, copywriters, authors are all up in arms, like, who's going to be writing books of the future? Are there going to be authors, or are authors just going to be leaning on AI? I'm seeing a lot in the world of speaking as well. People are wondering if our speakers are going to still write their own talks, or are they going to have AI develop their talks for them? And will we be able to tell the difference? Can we? If you run anything through Chat GPT right now, it's like, can you really tell the difference that was machine generated versus a human? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And it's just the beginning. It's going to become more sophisticated. So industries have always changed. I often use the music industry as an example. We just so happen right now at the time it's recording, right? We're privy to to see what's going on with Taylor Swift and Beyonce, both of which are on tour, right? They're killing it. They're making billions and they're killing it. And I mean, Taylor Swift, I haven't met anybody yet who hasn't felt like she crushed that concert. And you know what? This is what's going to be required to be a successful musician today, because you don't make a whole lot of money on your record sales because everything's streamed. Right. So if you go back in the days when Napster was starting,
they're also the last of the genuinely big stars.
Yeah.
There has not
We'll
been
see
a
if they're the
Taylor
last of
Swift.
them. I mean, I'm hoping they're not,
No, I
but
mean there
you raise
hasn't
a
been a
good point, though.
Beyonce since Beyonce. There hasn't been a
No.
Taylor Swift since Taylor Swift. Culture's too
Yeah.
balkanized now. Everybody's got
Yeah.
their own small little niche. There can
Yeah.
be someone, especially now with YouTube, there can be someone who literally will have 10 million followers and consider themselves very
Oh,
popular. And
100%.
most people have no clue who they are. You could pass them on the street and never know.
100%.
Yeah.
Right. There's a song out now. The name of it is not coming to me right now. I saw him perform. I think it was on an award show or something. Never heard of him. I mean, I'm pretty up on this stuff.
Yeah.
But again, it was all from YouTube. It now has like a #1 song or something. But what's interesting, I said, in the cycle of that, like I said, you go back to the day when Napster came along, like the first streaming platform. The music industry was up in arms. Napster was being sued by everybody. Eventually, sued enough times that they went out of business. But did it stop streaming music? Absolutely not. So the music industry has had to continue to adapt. It's still alive, but it's had to adapt and change. And I think that's just the reality for any of us that are in business. If something feels threatening to your industry or to your business, don't panic right away. It may be a threat, or how can you adapt? Right? Look what restaurants have accomplished through the pandemic. Suddenly, every restaurant has really good ability to deliver, or curbside pickup. Like, they adapted because they had to. I think we're seeing the same thing in education. It started to get less attractive to go away to university for 4 to 6 years at a massive expense, whereas a lot of universities are shifting to online education, or at least having the options. Now you have the option of in-person or online education. Things adapt. So I'm an eternal optimist that I don't look at the threats that come along in the world necessarily as definitively the end of your business or the end of your industry or the end of your life. There's a good chance you can figure out a way through it. I think you just have to get really creative. And that to me is, talk about getting to the heart of being self-employed. Like, when you have been self-employed long enough, and people have asked me, like, why are you still standing? I'm like, if I had to give one word to it, it would be resilience. Like, it's just keep going. And if I'm 40 years into being self-employed, and there are times that come along, whether it's an economy change or a pandemic that shuts down my speaking business or whatever, you think, okay, this is it. This is the time. Finally, 40 years later, this is the time I go under. And then I remind myself that's absolutely ridiculous, right? You've already weathered how many storms? But, I think most of us, no matter how long you've been in business, you're still going to have those moments of doubt. But if you can keep on going and get creative and come from kind of in the trenches, you'll figure out a way to keep staying relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. I definitely get now at this stage how much easier it is to move into pivot when you have things behind you and experience and a content library and assets and all this type of thing. And I realized, like, I started way too young. Like, if I wish someone had told me, no, don't do this right now. You don't have the stuff. You're way too young. This will not, you don't have the things that you need to be successful at this. I wish someone, because it's much easier now. It's much, much easier now to be kind of like, yeah, I have things, I have assets, I have stuff that I can compile. I can leverage stuff to build relationships with companies. I've never been in the position that I am now. And as my friend who's a world famous photographer, he says the only problem with you is you're 5 years you're 5 years too young for what you want to do. And I said, so I can be successful after 40 and be too old to enjoy it? That does not have any appeal to me.
Well, you're not too old over 40. I will argue that point. But no, I think the thing is, though, I actually, but what if you hadn't? You may feel like you started too young, but yeah, a lot of it, you talk about the iterations you're speaking of, a lot of times it just takes time. But again, this is why I encourage people to get support, because you can move through those iterations quicker, right? But that's where people lose a lot of time. But I don't think it's as much age as much time and experience. So be grateful you started young, because you're where you are now, 5 years ahead of, the game, if you will. But if you were just starting at 30, you'd be where
Yeah.
you are now at 40, and you might not see the rewards of that until 45. So, because I went into business when I was 20. I was 20 years old, professional photographer. And
Yeah, same.
you
I
know,
started my first
yeah.
little freelancing business when I was 17 years old. I would answer ads on Craigslist for I had three services: resumes, press releases, and brief articles. And I would just answer ads on Craigslist. Yeah, I started the same way. And
Yeah.
I just thought like, well, I'm good at writing these things and this is fine. So I'll do it and people will pay me small amounts of money for it. And it's just, yeah.
What's
If
changed
I
more than
had it to
anything.
do all over again, is I would go back and like stop myself.
Yeah. But again, the biggest difference I think is in the 18 years in which you lived, right?
Yeah.
The world is so different now than it was 18 years ago. I mean, I was in
Oh
business
God,
right?
yes.
I was in a business as a very high-end portrait photographer in the 80s and 90s, and you could throw spaghetti at the wall and make money. It was remarkably easy. Looking
Yeah.
back, I had an 8-week waiting list for 15 years. And I'll be honest, it wasn't until so I started really phasing out of photography in 2016. And I think it was in 2017, 2018, even. So we're just talking about 5 years ago. I was having a conversation with somebody who kept trying to teach me ways that I should prospect to get coaching clients and to build my coaching practice and to enter into this world of thought leadership, all these prospecting ideas. And he kept talking about it. And I eventually had to stop him and say, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be stupid, but what does prospecting mean? We're talking 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I had to ask somebody, what does prospecting mean? Of course, now to most people, it's the seeking out of clients, it's prospective clients. I realized how spoiled I was in my photography career. Not that I didn't work hard to build it, but in hindsight, I didn't know what prospecting was because I had an 8-week waiting list for 15 years. There was no prospecting. I had a
Yeah.
flood of demand, even though I had such a tight niche. I had a tight niche of the type of person I photographed, their lifestyle, who could afford my services. So it was a very small niche. And yet I had this extensive, so you could practically throw spaghetti at the wall and make money. Today, I mean, it's hard to make money. It is hard. And this is not a scarcity mindset. There's tons of opportunity out there and there's tons of money out there in the world. It's just really hard to stand out. It's really hard to get, and I don't believe the world has a shorter attention span. I think it's just people have more
There's
choices.
a lot more of everything.
There's a lot more choices.
I'm in the world of books and content. I'm competing with every streaming service.
Correct.
Self-publishing has exploded the number of books being
We're all
published.
competing with Amazon.
The number
how quickly people expect things. Right?
Yes. Oh my God. I had a whole business fall apart because of that. Yes. I mean, this is all.
It's
absolutely.
just harder. Yeah, it's harder. So, it's what you were able to accomplish 18 years ago at 17 years old is to your credit. I mean, if you were 17 years old trying today, it could be a lot harder, but
that wouldn't exist. I mean, that business model wouldn't exist.
Wouldn't exist. And I will also add, but I tell you, these 17, 18, 20 somethings now, they have a level of savvy thinking that I admire. Like there's a way in which they think differently because they grew up with the technology. They grew up in thinking bigger. I always say, like, my biggest nemesis in business today, in the type of business I'm in, an author trying to sell, a lot of books, a podcast host trying to get a lot of listeners and trying to serve a lot of students in a self-employed business institute. My biggest nemesis is that my brain is not used to thinking in such big numbers. My brain is used to thinking about a very low volume, high ticket photography business. My brain is used to thinking about a time when you didn't have to be so scalable and people would still notice you. My brain is used to thinking that you don't need to have a big level of popularity in order to get the attention. All that's changed, right? So I fight against that today because of how long I've been in business. That I had to fight against, I constantly retraining my brain to realize how big you have to go. I mean, anybody I know that's writing a book, I always tell them, because they have, I'm going to sell 1 million books. I'm like, you have no idea how difficult it is to sell 100 books. I mean, 90% of books sell less than 1,000 copies over a lifetime. So, you got how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of books on Amazon. that the platform didn't even exist 15 years ago, or I'm not sure when they started.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that, I think, but again, that's something that people growing up today, people going into business today, their brain is already thinking bigger than my brain ever thought, that I have to retrain myself to think. So I think that's,
Well,
that's
they've
the,
grown up in a world of the 100,000 like Instagram influencer and the,
yeah,
the million follower TikTok account and all this type of thing. When I teach social media for marketing for small businesses, and I have this section at the beginning where I talk about the history of social media. Years ago, I would say, "Oh, this only started 5 years ago," and then it was 10 years, and now it's 15 years ago. And I said, it's I'm one of the few people who does this stuff who remembers what the world was like when none of this existed.
right.
I
Well, it
mean,
was
I will
MySpace.
scare, yes, I will scare the children and be kind of like, how we used to find local businesses? The phone company sent you a book with on printed yellow paper, and you look things up alphabetically, and
Yeah.
they're kind of like, how did you like, for them that might as well be the dark ages. Like, how did you survive? It's like, oh yeah, no, that's how we, like, you want a plumber, you better go to the yellow pages and look under
Right.
P,
Yeah.
and
I did an interview on my podcast earlier today, and he used this as a great example, how there was a time not that terribly long ago, but when your phone rang, we ran from the front yard to get into the house in time before the phone stopped ringing, right? I mean, there was like the
and we didn't
phone
know who
ringing.
it was.
No, the phone ringing was an event. So you're like
Yes.
running. We're now, we're ignoring 99.9% of the calls that come in, right? So, because it's just
You
been
have
junked over and
whole
spammed
groups of
over.
people that will not to answer the phone. Like,
I
and
don't answer the phone
millennials and
unless I
Gen
know the
Z.
number.
Yeah, nobody answers the phone anymore. It's very hard to get people on the phone, and those
Yep.
younger people that be like, even like, I'm a millennial, 35. Most of my friends are kind of like, we don't call each other, we text. Like, or you
Absolutely.
text before you call, like, you don't just call somebody out of the blue.
Correct.
Um, like, the only
Yep.
people I call out of the blue are my Nana, who's 84,
Yeah.
and a couple of my friends, all of whom, I shit you not, are over 45 and are used to that sort of thing. I grew up with that, like, the phone is ringing. My mom, Cameron, bring me the phone, I'm in the bathroom. Like, that was my
Right.
childhood. But
Yep.
that's for anybody born after 2000, 2004.
Yeah.
That world hasn't existed for them.
Yeah. All righty. My oldest, my son he's born in 92. I mean, I'll call him, he won't answer, and then he'll text me, tell me he's too busy to pick up the phone or whatever he's doing. Like, I don't think I've ever just called him and gotten him on the phone. So we're talking about even the 90s and later, right? I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
but again, so their mindset is different, which is why, kind of circling this back around, that's why I end up coaching and working with people that are either, 3 to 5 years in business, because it's, they need to know all that stuff. But also any of us that have been in business more than 10, 15 years, we have to relearn all this stuff. Like, we have to think differently. Our brain has to operate differently. We need different practices. So that's also, and like I said, I think the thing that stands out to me is how often a 55-year-old will reach out to me for coaching support. Maybe they've left their corporate job already, or they're interested in joining the Business Institute. And I love how often I hear people of that age, 50, 55, 60 years old, say to me, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. I just know I'm not dead yet. I love that. Like, that's a whole, and I'm 59, I feel the same way. In so many ways, like, I feel like I'm just beginning. Even though I've been in business for 40 years, I'm 59 years old. There's a lot there's a lot of that freshness where people of some age, 50 to 60 years old, are feeling like they're just beginning, and they don't know what their future might hold, but they just know they're not dead yet, and retirement isn't even on the radar. Like, what does retirement even mean? Retirement, one could say you're retired.
I'm so amazed to hear that, because I already feel like I am middle-aged and half dead, and it's time to start winding shit up.
No. But here's the thing. You might feel that way now, and you might be, honestly, I think your 30s is a pretty exhausting time of life. I tell you what,
You are the fourth person this week to tell me that. It's so funny.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
the 30s.
Someone was like, hang on to your friends from your 30s. You'll meet them again in your 50s when you all have time again.
Exactly.
Because the kids will be all this type of, yep. I'm kind of like, you're literally the fourth person to tell me that this week. It's so
the
funny.
30s are just exhausting. But it's when I was raising, because I was a photographer so young, and I had my first child at 28, so I had kids young, between the ages of, I had three kids. My wife and I had three kids between the ages of 28 and 33. So we were done having kids at 33, and most of our friends weren't even close to beginning, or we hadn't even been in relationships yet. And because I started so young, I always told my kids, and my plan was to retire at 50. Because when you're going into business at 20, 25, and you're a photographer, I'm thinking 50's old. My father died at 52. And when he died, I was 20. When he died, he was 52. And I thought, he lived a good life. I mean, it seemed,
Yeah.
52 seemed like, he lived a good life, even though I was only 20. I knew it was young to die, but even still, it didn't seem as young as it did until I got close to that age. I'm like, that's really young. I mean, 52 was really young for him to die. And, but 50 came along, and here I am today, now 59. And like I said, in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm just beginning. But I said to my son one day, I said, well, so much for my dream of retiring at 50. And he made a great point. He said, well, in a way you did. In a way you did retire from photography by 50. Like, you kind of knew that 30 years in a single career was likely to be the lifespan of it. So in a way you did. What you didn't know, though, is that you would want to recreate a whole different, another career. And that's the way I look at it now. It's like, in a way, I did retire. I mean, I do very little photography today, but for the last several years, I've done very little. I've been phasing that out of my life to make room for coaching and teaching in the Business Institute. And I don't see any end to this. There are some men I admire greatly in their mid 70s who are going strong, writing books. I define retirement today if anybody asks me what does retirement look like, I said retirement to me doesn't look like stop working. It looks like there will be a time where maybe my life will be appointment free. Like I won't be on demand at a certain time at a certain place, but I'll keep working. I'll keep writing books. I'll keep coaching. I'll keep, putting out content. I'll keep trying to improve the world, just not under as much demand to be on a Zoom call every hour for 6 to 8 hours in a row or whatever. That to me is the best version of retirement I can foresee as a self-employed person, because I don't plan on stopping until I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
You're young.
Yeah. No, that's a good. No, I like I said, I so appreciate, that, because and people tell me that all the time, and it's still, I don't know, like, I think the problem is I started so young, and so it's kind of like, yeah, I've already been at this, 15-ish years, a little over, sort of thing. So I feel, probably more tired than most, and I'm just kind of ready to be done, and I need a nap.
What you don't know yet, though, is what's the next thing? What's the next thing that can come along that totally re-engages you and completely makes you passionate? Like I said, if you had asked me 16, 20 years ago why I was on this planet, I would have said to be a photographer. So the only skill set I knew, I was really good at it, making a lot of money at it, and loving it. I loved every minute of it. So if you had asked me 20 years ago why I existed, why I was on this planet, I would have said to be a photographer. Never could I have known that there was a whole other something else in the world that was going to make me even more passionate. And that's what I do now in the Self-Employed Business Institute. Nothing makes me more excited to wake up every day than supporting the self-employed business owners I work with every day. And I mean, even I never woke up in the morning as excited as a photographer as I do now, waking up knowing I get to talk to self-employed business owners who are killing it in the world and doing really cool things and have interesting businesses and putting their heart and their lives on the line. So I could not have predicted this. So same for you. You have no idea what might be around the corner that's going to be just dive into such passion and excitement for you that you'll, as I do, you might end up being 59, but your brain still thinks you're 30 because you're so excited about what you're doing.
Yeah,
your body will say otherwise, but your brain will think you're 30.
Yeah, I've never been excited or passionate about anything I've ever done, so that would be refreshing. I've just kind of, coming from neurodivergent land, autism, ADHD, employment is very difficult with these mental health conditions. And so a lot of what I did was out of necessity, not because I wanted to do it or felt really great about it or all this type of thing. And yeah, there's aspects of the business I enjoy. This I enjoy because I like talking to people. I like meeting people. I like finding out about people's experience that are wholly different than mine. Um, and I like talking about ideas and concepts. Which is something that most people have no desire to do whatsoever. And I learned that at a very young age. And so, but yeah, there's lots of aspects of it that I made 9 TikTok videos this morning from longer podcasts that I have out this week, and that is part of my business I absolutely can't stand to do, but it's very, very necessary. And I have a whole list of analytics and numbers to tell me that it's very important. There's so the constant, the hustle, the sales of it all. I have a to-do list as long as your arm that never ever seems to get shorter, because whatever gets marked off on the bottom, I keep adding new stuff on the top, so it's a very Sisyphean sort of thing. So I appreciate that, because it's been so long since I've had any of that love or joy or excitement or anything like that. So I'll cling to the edge of the pool, hoping one day it will come back.
I hope so for you as well.
Very good. Well, we've reached that time of the show where it's time for plugs. So why don't you let everybody know where we can find you online, where we can interact with you, and where we can learn more.
I love that. It's time for plugs. Well, if you are self-employed or thinking about being self-employed, I think a wonderful tool that anybody can take advantage of is called the selfemployedassessment.com. selfemployedassessment.com. It's a custom algorithm I had built, asks you 6 questions, and from those 6 questions, it kicks out a really thorough report on your strengths and weaknesses in self-employed, what I refer to as the self-employed ecosystem. Because one thing we know when you're self-employed, it's all integrated. It's an ecosystem. So if you're off balance in one area, it can affect other areas. Or it certainly can make you work a lot harder than you need to. So selfemployedassessment.com is a great place to start. And the Business Institute is selfemployedbusinessinstitute.com. Also a great resource. We're really proud of what we've developed, because there's nothing else out there like there. Many of our students have PhDs, masters, like well educated, but you go into business for yourself, it's a whole other world. You can have all the masters and PhDs, and it doesn't matter when you're out there in the real world doing the real thing. And that's the type of education we offer, because I'm the one teaching it, and that's exactly been my life. So those are the 2 best resources.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me. I wish you well.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.